The making of the modern world, steam power.
Dr. Sidney Soclof. Dr. Sidney22@gmail.com. 2023. Narration by Dr. Sidney Soclof.
Zoe Phonemes.
And Nathan Koltove. For a more complete discussion of YouTube navigation, please go to this video using the link here.
Steam locomotives.
Steam engines like this drove trains from the early 1800s to the 1950s.
Though the engines varied in size and complexity, their fundamental operation remained essentially as illustrated here in a steam engine. The boiler, fueled by wood, oil, or coal, continuously boils water in an enclosed chamber, creating high-pressure steam.
Steam from the boiler enters the steam chest and is admitted to the front end of the cylinder by the valve slide, in blue. The high-pressure steam presses the piston backward, driving the engine wheels around 1/2 turn.
On a steam locomotive, the crosshead normally links to a drive rod, and from there to coupling rods that drive the locomotive's wheels in this diagram. The crosshead is connected to a drive rod that connects to one of 3 drive wheels for the train.
The 3 wheels are connected via coupling rods so they turn in unison.
With improved boiler design, the British engineer Richard Trevithick built a non-condensing steam-driven carriage in 1801, and the first steam locomotive in 1803, though its boiler later exploded.
The first steam locomotive to run on rails was built by Richard Trevithick in 1803. It could haul 20 tons at a speed of 5 miles per hour.
A key factor in Trevithick's engine was feeding the steam exhausted from the locomotive cylinders up the smokestack. This produced a vacuum that drew air through the firebox. An increase in steam flowing up the smokestack resulted in a faster burning of fuel and more steam.
The Stockton and Darlington Railroad, opened in England in 1825, was the first true railroad. It greatly reduced the cost of transporting coal, and demonstrated that large profits could be made by building railways.
In 1829, George Stephenson built his successful rocket locomotive. It contributed to the rapid expansion of railroads in Great Britain, and later in other countries.
This is the rocket locomotive.
The Liverpool and Manchester Railway was the world's first intercity passenger railway in which all the trains were run on a schedule, and were hauled for most of the distance solely by steam locomotives.
The Liverpool and Manchester Railway opened in 1830 and ran for 31 miles between the cities of Liverpool and Manchester in northwest England.
The Liverpool and Manchester Railway was built primarily to provide faster transport of raw materials and finished goods between Liverpool, the most important port in the north of England, and the mills in Manchester and surrounding towns, the centre of the textile industry.
The proposed Liverpool and Manchester Railway was a serious economic threat to the Bridgewater Canal that was making a fortune by shipping goods between Liverpool and Manchester.
Steamboats and steamships.
Steam propulsion of ships was tried successfully in 1787 by the American John Fitch, who placed a steamboat on the Delaware River.
This is an early model of Fitch's paddle steamboat in 1785 on the Delaware River across from Philadelphia.
This is John Fitch's steamboat. It was the first steam vehicle employed in the business of transportation, and made trial trips in 1788. in regular trips between Trenton and Philadelphia in 1790.
In 1784, James Rumsey built a pump-driven, water jet boat and successfully steamed upstream on the Potomac River in 1786.
Another early pioneer in steam engines was Oliver Evans, 1755 to 1819. He was known as the Ward of America and was an advocate of high-pressure steam. Evans was one of the most prolific and influential inventors in the early years of the United States.
This is Evans' steamboat on the Delaware River near Philadelphia in 1804.
This is the Enterprise, 1814, the first commercially viable steamboat on the Mississippi. It used a high-pressure steam engine adapted from a design by Oliver Evans.
In 1807, Robert Fulton built a side-wheel paddle steamer called the Clermont. Equipped with a Watt and Boulton engine, Fulton's Clermont, which was more economically successful than Fitch's endeavors, and traveled from New York City to Albany, ushering in the age of steamships.
The first commercially successful steamship of the paddle steamer design, the North River Steamboat, later known as the Clermont, operated on the Hudson River, at that time often known as the North River, between New York and Albany.
North River Steamboat, or the Clermont, was neither the first steamboat built nor even the first to be operated in scheduled service, but she was the start of the first long-lasting and financially successful steamboat business.
The Clermont was constructed by Fulton, with the financial backing of the wealthy investor and politician Robert Livingston.
Robert Livingston, 1746 to 1813, was a lawyer, politician, and diplomat from New York, and a founding father of the United States. He was often called the Chancellor, after an early office he held.
This is a picture of the North River Steamboat, better known as the Clermont.
This is another picture of the North River Steamboat, better known as the Clermont.
This is another picture of the North River Steamboat, better known as the Clermont.
Following the New Orleans, several steamboats we built at Pittsburgh in the next few years: the Comet, 1813, Vesuvius, 1814, and the Etna.
This started the golden era of the paddle-wheeler steamboats on the Mississippi River in 1814. Only 21 steamboats arrived in New Orleans. By 1819 there were 191, and in 1833 more than 1,200 steamboat cargoes were unloaded.
The steamboat Virginia went all of the way up the Mississippi River, above St. Louis to reach Fort Snelling, Minnesota, near the Twin Cities, in 1823.
By 1830, the steamboat age had come to the upper Mississippi, and by 1840, There was heavy river commerce between St. Louis and the head of navigation at St. Anthony's Falls, vicinity of St. Paul.
Not only could the steamboats haul freight, but they had comfortable accommodations for passengers. Even more important, they could travel upstream almost as easily as they traveled downstream.
In the period preceding the Civil War, the decks of the steamboats carried cotton and other produce to market. They brought back the staples and the fineries available only from outside the region. They brought visitors from afar and furnished transportation to other sections of the country.
Steamboat travel was hazardous and irregular in the early years. Although it furnished faster, more dependable, and more useful transportation, it left much to be desired during its early period of development.
The famous race between the Robert E. Lee and the Natchez was made in July 1870 from New Orleans to St. Louis, 1,278 river miles.
This race was won by the Robert E. Lee, with a time of 3 days, 18 hours and 14 minutes. For most of the 19th century and part of the early 20th century, trade on the Mississippi River would be dominated by paddle-wheel steamboats. Their success led to penetration deep into the continent. The steamboat St. Louis arrived in New Orleans in 1931 with 28,200 bales of cotton on 8 barges and 3 other barges of grain and merchandise. This is supposed to be the largest cotton tow that ever traveled the Mississippi River.
The steamboat era was ending due to the introduction of modern, diesel-driven vessels with greater towing power some 30 years earlier. Very few of the paddle-wheel steamboats survive to the present day. Boiler explosions or fires destroyed most. One of the few surviving Mississippi stern-wheelers from this period, the Julius C. Wilkie, is a museum ship at Winona, Minnesota.
The Belle of Louisville, out of Louisville, Kentucky, is the oldest continually operating steamboat on the inland waterways of the United States. She was laid down as the Idlewild in 1914.
Today, the only operating steamboats on the Mississippi River and its tributary rivers, Ohio, Illinois, Tennessee, and Cumberland, are for passengers on cruises, such as the American Queen shown here, the world's largest operating river steamboat.
The American Queen has a capacity of 436 passengers and a crew of 160.
This is the new Viking Mississippi on the Mississippi River. It is now the largest cruise ship on the Mississippi River, with a capacity of 386 guests in 193 staterooms. It is not, however, steam-powered, but uses diesel engines.
This is the nuclear submarine, the USS Virginia, SSN 774.
The nuclear reactor is a heat source to turn water into steam, which drives steam turbines. So, yes, indeed, it can be considered as a steamboat. This is the Pittsburgh Wharf in 1890.
This is Pittsburgh in the 1900s.
This is Pittsburgh in 1908.
This again is Pittsburgh in 1908.
This is Pittsburgh in 1910. In 1819, the very first Atlantic crossing was made with a ship powered by steam geared to 2 paddle wheels on the ship's sides. The Savannah was 320 tons and 110 feet, 34 meters, long.
The Savannah wasn't entirely driven by steam. As often as the crew could, they would use the sails.
In 1819, the Savannah made the voyage between New Jersey and Liverpool in 27 days, but the ship had relied on her sails most of the time. The engine ran for only 85 hours, or less than 4 days.
The Savannah steam vessel recently arrived at Liverpool from America. The first vessel of the kind that ever crossed the Atlantic was chased by the Kite revenue cruiser on the Cork station, which mistook her for a ship on fire.
But these early steamers weren't seen as passenger ships. Being a passenger on a ship sailing such a vast distance up until then was neither common nor pleasant.
The ships were designed for cargo, so there was not much space left for passengers.
Not until 1833 did the Canadian paddle steamer SS Royal William cross the Atlantic with steam as the prime source of propulsion.
However, the engines of the Royal William had to be stopped every few days because they had to be scraped from the accumulated salt deposits from the seawater used in her boilers.
While the cleaning was being done, the Royal William depended on her sails.
Steam road vehicles.
This is the Fardier Vapor or steam wagon, built by Nicholas Joseph Cugnot in 1769. This was a motorized vehicle for transporting wagons and especially artillery.
The steam wagon was built in 2 versions for use by the French army. It was intended to be capable of transporting 4 tons, with speeds up to 2.5 miles per hour, or 4 kilometers per hour.
The steam wagon was a tricycle, with 2 rear wheels and a steerable front wheel controlled by a tiller. It is probably the first self-propelled vehicle, although it remained a short-lived experiment due to inherent instability and failure to meet the Army's specified performance level.
The London steam carriage was an early steam-powered road vehicle constructed by Richard Trevithick in 1803, and the world's first self-propelled passenger-carrying vehicle.
Cugnot had built a steam vehicle 30 years previously, but that had been a slow-moving artillery tractor, not built to carry passengers.
Amédée Boulin manufactured his first steam vehicle in 1873. And in 1875 his L'Obéissant, or the Obedient, made the first road trip between Le Mans and Paris in 18 hours.
L'Obéissant carried 12 passengers and had a cruising speed of 19 miles per hour, or 30 kilometers per hour, and a top speed of 25 miles per hour, or 40 kilometers per hour. It was driven by 2 steam engines, one for each rear wheel.
Sylvester Roper invented a steam carriage in 1863, which he drove around Boston, Massachusetts. One of his 1863 carriages went to the Henry Ford Museum, and another is in the Smithsonian Institution.
In 1897, the first automobiles to be driven successfully by non-condensing, steam-driven engines were built by Francis and Freeland Stanley in Newton, Massachusetts. These steam-driven cars were more powerful than the first gasoline-driven vehicles.
These steam-driven cars eventually used boiler pressures of up to 1,000 pounds per square inch, 6,895 kilopascals.
Although condensers had been added by 1915, steam-driven automobiles were to face their demise shortly thereafter, largely due to the engine's enormous weight, low efficiency, and constant need of attention.
These cars were manufactured by the Stanley Motor Carriage Company from 1902 to 1924, and called Stanley steamers.
Farms in the United States used steam-powered tractors. Self-propelled steam-driven threshing machines moved from farm to farm during the harvesting season until they were replaced by gasoline or diesel-driven units.
Before the advent of small electric motors, steam engines powered most manufacturing plants.
A single, centrally located engine delivered power to machines by means of shafts, pulleys, and belts.
This is a picture of a steam-powered factory.
Steam turbines.
The type of steam engines that have been discussed up to this point are reciprocating steam engines. In a reciprocating steam engine, steam drives a piston in a cylinder back and forth in a reciprocating fashion.
The speed of operation of these engines is limited by the inertia of the heavy moving parts, in particular the piston and connecting rods.
The power produced by an engine is proportional to the force times the speed.
Reciprocating steam engines eventually became too large, heavy, and slow to meet the steadily increasing demand for more power from a single unit.
The first device that can be classified as a reaction steam turbine is the eolipile proposed by Heron of Alexandria. During the 1st century AD in this device, steam was supplied through a hollow rotating shaft to a hollow rotating sphere.
The steam then emerged through two opposing curved tubes, just as water issues from a rotating lawn sprinkler. The device was little more than a toy, since no useful work was produced.
Further experimentation with steam engines led to the development of steam turbines, which use steam from the boilers to turn fan blades at high speed. This mechanical energy was harnessed to turn the propeller shaft.
A steam turbine consists of an alternating series of one or more rotating discs mounted on a drive shaft, rotors, and static discs fixed to the turbine casing or stators. The rotors have a propeller-like arrangement of blades at the outer edge.
Steam acts upon these blades, producing rotary motion. The stator consists of a similar, but fixed, series of blades that serve to redirect the steam flow onto the next rotor stage.
Steam turbines provide direct rotational force, and therefore do not require a linkage mechanism to convert reciprocating to rotary motion. Thus, they produce smoother rotational forces on the output shaft.
This contributes to a lower maintenance requirement and less wear on the machinery they power than a comparable reciprocating engine.
The main use for steam turbines is in electricity generation. About 80% of the world's electric production is by use of steam turbines, and to a lesser extent for ship propulsion.
For electricity generation, the high speed of rotation is an advantage. For ship propulsion, the light weight, high efficiency and high power are highly desirable.
Virtually all nuclear power plants and some nuclear submarines generate electricity by heating water to provide steam that drives a turbine connected to an electrical generator for main propulsion. A limited number of steam turbine railroad locomotives were manufactured.
The British engineer Charles Parsons designed a powerful and compact steam turbine in 1884 in just a few years. By 1897, the steam turbine for marine propulsion became dominant over the reciprocating steam engine. However, reciprocating steam engines continued to be produced in the U.S. through World War II.
The Turbinia was the first ship powered by a steam turbine. It was built in 1894, just a few years after Parsons first began manufacturing turbines.
In 1897, Parsons captured the attention of the British Navy and royal family with his ship, the Turbinia, the world's first steam turbine-driven vessel.
Parsons piloted the Turbinia through a parade of British naval ships during the celebration of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897 at an astounding speed of 34.5 knots, 63 kilometers per hour, or 39 miles per hour, shocking all in attendance.
The Royal Navy's fastest ships gave chase, but could not catch up to the speeding Turbinia.
This is one of Turbinia's 3 turbines, each of which turns a propeller.
Just 2 years later, Britain launched the first steam turbine-driven warship, the HMS Viper, which made 36.5 knots.
The increasing demand for electricity also called for larger steam units in electric power plants. Here 2 steam turbines replaced reciprocating steam engines during the early part of the 20th century.
Today a single steam turbine generator unit can produce more than 1 million kilowatts of electric power.
By 1900, the largest steam turbine generator unit produced 1,200 kilowatts, and 10 years later the capacity of such machines had increased to more than 30,000 kilowatts.
This output far exceeded that of even the largest reciprocating steam engines, making steam turbines the principal prime movers in central power stations after the first decade of the 20th century.
Following the successful installation of a series of 68,000 horsepower turbines in the transatlantic passenger liners Lusitania and Mauretania, launched in 1906, steam turbines also gained preeminence in large-scale marine applications, first with vessels burning fossil fuels, and then with those using nuclear power.
Steam generator pressures increased from about 1,000 kilopascals, 145 psi or 10 atmospheres, in 1895, to 1,380 kilopascals, 200 psi or 14 atmospheres, by 1919, and then to 9,300 kilopascals, 1,350 psi or 92 atmospheres, by 1940.
Steam temperatures climbed from about 180 degrees Celsius, 356 degrees Fahrenheit, to 315 degrees Celsius, 600 degrees Fahrenheit, and eventually to 510 degrees Celsius, 950 degrees Fahrenheit, over the same time period.
Steam turbines for electricity generation.
These are the impulse and reaction types of steam turbines.
This shows the operation of the reaction type of steam turbine.
Steam turbines, which are technically a type of steam engine, are still widely used for generating electricity. About 86% of all electric power in the world is generated by use of steam turbines.
This is a diagram of a coal-fired electric power plant.
Nuclear power.
The Shippingport Atomic Power Station was the first full-scale nuclear power plant. It is located on the Ohio River in western Pennsylvania, about 25 miles from Pittsburgh. It was in operation for 25 years from 1957 until 1982.
We will now have a video clip about nuclear power.
This huge building you see behind me is one of Ontario Power Generation's nuclear power generating stations. In essence, it's a factory that converts the energy of the atom into a flow of electrons, or what's commonly called electricity, the electricity that helps power the province. Nuclear, hydroelectric, and fossil fuel generating stations have many similarities in the way they generate electricity. Where they differ is their fuel source. OPG's nuclear stations use naturally occurring uranium that's processed into little ceramic pellets like this. An unused fuel pellet emits very little radiation. However, it holds the potential to produce a whole lot of energy. Just 8 of these pellets will power an average house for almost 1 year. The fuel pellets are sealed into metal tubes, which are then welded together to form a fuel bundle. Several thousand fuel bundles are then inserted into a large tank called a calandria, which is the heart of the nuclear reactor. Nuclear generating stations split the uranium atoms in the fuel in a process called fission, and the result is the release of a tremendous amount of heat. To unlock the heat energy in the uranium atoms, you need what's called a moderator. In CANDU reactors, a special kind of water called heavy water is used as the moderator. Heavy water is 10% heavier than ordinary water because it contains a higher than normal proportion of deuterium, which is a form of hydrogen. The heavy water surrounds the fuel bundles and slows down tiny particles called neutrons, so they are more likely to hit and split the uranium atoms. A chain reaction of atom splitting ensures there is a constant source of heat to heat the heavy water. The heated heavy water is pumped through the reactor in a closed system to a set of boilers, where it boils ordinary water into high-pressure steam. The heavy water, having done its job, is recirculated back to the reactor to pick up more heat and cool the fuel. The high-pressure steam, made from ordinary water, is transported through pipes to a large turbine, where it pushes the blades and turns the shaft connected to a rotor in the generator, causing the rotor to spin. The spinning rotor is a large electromagnet that produces a rotating magnetic field. This field moves across coils of copper wire in the generator stator, producing electricity that can be sent across transmission lines. The steam coming out of the turbine is condensed back into water using cooling water from the lake and pumped back to the boilers to continue the process. Ontario Power Generation's nuclear generating stations have sophisticated safety systems to control, cool, and contain the process each step of the way, generating electricity safely and virtually free of all smog and greenhouse gas emissions.
We will now have a very short video about nuclear power loops.
In a pressurized water reactor, water is enclosed in 3 separate but interacting loops. In loop 1, water becomes intensely hot as it absorbs heat from the energy of nuclear fission. But because it is under very high pressure, the water doesn't boil and remains a liquid. Pipes from loop 1 wind through a steam generator tank that is part of a second, lower pressure water loop. Heat from loop 1 boils the water in the steam generator, and the energy from the steam powers turbines that drive electricity generators. The steam is then cooled and condensed in a heat exchange with a third water loop, which carries water from the cooling tower. The liquid water in loop 2 then returns to the steam generator where it is reheated and the cycle continues.
Paris is the city of lights. And these are lights powered to a great extent by nuclear energy. In fact, nearly 80% of France's power comes from nuclear power plants, and that number is growing.
We will now have a video about nuclear power in France.
Since Chernobyl, most European nations have been moving away from nuclear power, but not France. Here on the coast of Normandy, workers are building a new $4 billion reactor, the third in the town of Flamanville, and France's 59th. Per capita, that's more than any other country in the world.
It has worked for years and years and years, from the end of the Second World War, you see, without any accident.
You trust the French engineers?
Yeah, I do.
But not everyone is convinced. Jan Werling is the spokesman for France's Green Party.
The nuclear energy lobby is very important in France because they have millions of euros, and they spend these euros in advertising to convince the population that nuclear is safe, sure, modern, and this all is not true.
The biggest danger, Greens say, is nuclear waste, what the electrical utility calls stockage or recycling. Right now, spent fuel rods are stored underground, where critics insist they remain a deadly threat but the government strongly supports nuclear power.
Nuclear plants for France is both an economic and an ecological opportunity.
Nuclear energy provides nearly 80% of France's electricity at one of the lowest rates in Europe, and without generating tons of greenhouse gases. Two key factors French officials believe will change minds about nuclear energy in the rest of the world.
Nuclear is not the unique solution, but it's really a part of the solution. And if you avoid nuclear, you are not going to be able to solve the global problem. That's true in Europe. That's true in the States.
In fact, there's a growing consensus in the United States, even among some environmental groups, that nuclear energy has got to be a part of the package in terms of providing for America's growing energy needs. Last month, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission accepted the first application for a new nuclear plant in the United States. Since 1978, more applications are in the pipeline. In Paris, Greg Burke, Fox News.
Should we be like the French?
We will now have a video. Let's do it like France does it. Nuclear power.
With power demands rising and concerns over global warming increasing, what the world needs now is an efficient means of producing large amounts of carbon-free energy. And one of the few available options is nuclear, a technology whose time seemed to come and go and may now be coming again. For the first time in decades, new nuclear plants are being built, and not just in Iran and North Korea. With zero greenhouse gas emissions, the U.S. government, public utilities, and even some environmental groups are taking a second look at nuclear power. And one of the first places they're looking to is France, where it's been a resounding success. When much of the world spurned nuclear power 30 years ago, the French, being French, decided to go their own way and embrace it. Paris, the city of light, is lit by nuclear energy, which powers just about everything in France. Its homes, its factories, even its high-speed railroads. Nearly 80% of the country's electricity comes from 58 nuclear power plants crammed into a country the size of Texas. Pierre Gadonex, the head of Electricité de France, the country's national utility, says it all began with the French obsession for energy independence.
In France, we have nearly no coal, we have no oil, so clearly nuclear appeared to be the best way. And 30 years later, it appeared to be a very smart decision.
Because nuclear plants emit no greenhouse gases, France has the cleanest air in the industrialized world. And because the price of oil is now around $60 a barrel, it has the lowest electric bills in Europe. In fact, France has so much cheap electricity, it exports it to its European neighbors. French nuclear plants supply power to parts of Germany, Italy, and help light the city of London.
It is a very competitive way of producing electricity when oil prices are beyond, I would say, around $40 per barrel.
And the rest of the world has taken notice. Nearly a dozen countries, including the United States, are either building or planning to build new nuclear plants. And some of that business will go to Areva, the French government monopoly that controls every step of its nuclear industry, from uranium mining to plant construction to radioactive waste disposal. Deep in the wine country of Burgundy, in this massive factory, Areva is building the first European reactors since the Chernobyl disaster. What is happening with your business?
It's growing, definitely growing.
Bertrand Durand is Executive Vice President for Manufacturing. Is that where the fuel rods come through?
Yes.
Besides the new reactors it's building for France and Finland, Durand says Areva is bidding on a project to build 4 new nuclear reactors in China. How many plants do you think might be built in the next 20 years?
A minimum of 20, which is quite a change when you compare it to the past.
And some of them will almost certainly be in the United States, which hasn't built a new nuclear plant since the 1970s. With energy prices and global temperatures near their recorded highs, and the possibility that greenhouse gases will be regulated, the Bush administration is pushing a nuclear revival.
In many respects, the nuclear industry in the United States has disappeared.
Clay Sell is the Deputy Secretary of Energy and the administration's point man on nuclear power. With world energy demand expected to rise 50% over the next 25 years, he says nuclear is the only practical option for producing large amounts of electricity with no carbon emissions.
No serious person can look at the challenge of greenhouse gases and climate change and not come to the conclusion that nuclear power has to play a significant and growing role in meeting that challenge worldwide.
How much interest is there right now in building new plants?
There is a tremendous amount of interest. 2 years ago, there was exactly 0 plants on the drawing boards here in the United States. Today, there are about 15 companies talking about building over 30 commercial nuclear power reactors. Now, all of those won't get built, but we think there's a significant chance that many of them will be built.
But so far, no one has signed up to actually build one, an undertaking that requires a huge investment of capital and a certain amount of faith.
The purpose of our meeting today is to decide whether to shut down the Indian Point nuclear plants.
In the 1980s and 90s, political opposition, regulatory delays, cost overruns, and a drop in electricity demand forced utilities to pull the plug on dozens of projects, and the industry has a long memory.
There is some level of concern, but what we've found out and what we have seen is the more educated the public is, the more they understand the technology, the more comfortable and the more accepting they are.
Americans, he says, tend to forget that there are 103 nuclear plants operating in the United States that have produced 20% of the nation's electricity without major incident in the 28 years since 3 Mile Island.
And in fact, they have an outstanding record. There has never been a radiation-related death in the commercial nuclear sector in the United States, ever.
David Gerard, the head of science and research for the World Resources Institute, an environmental think tank in Washington, acknowledges that the industry's safety record has been pretty good. Why are so many people afraid of it?
When there's a small probability of a catastrophe, people think about the catastrophe and not the small probability.
Why have the French accepted it? And what is there about the two cultures that may influence that?
The French love high technology, whether it be nuclear power or supersonic airplanes or high-speed trains. They love that. And they accord huge respect and credibility to scientists and engineers. And scientists and engineers actually run these programs.
One of the things the French tell us is that they consider nuclear power to be a green energy source. Accurate?
Accurate, except for one thing, which is perhaps the Achilles heel of nuclear power. It's certainly accurate that the plants emit no carbon dioxide. The one thing that needs to be solved is the issue of long-term radioactive waste storage and management.
For decades, the United States has temporarily stored its radioactive waste on site at nuclear power plants, awaiting a permanent solution. The Yucca Mountain Repository in Nevada. It is years behind schedule, will cost $30 billion to open, and is already too small to hold all of the waste. The French have taken a different approach to the problem. While the United States decided to store its nuclear waste, the French embraced the idea of reprocessing it. Instead of burying the spent fuel rods underground or underwater, they decided to build this massive plant on the coast of Normandy and recycle the used fuel and reuse it. This high-security facility stretches for 2 miles along the coast. All of France's spent nuclear fuel eventually ends up here, in pools of water. If I fell in, would I die?
No. I hope that you can swim.
Yes.
Yes.
After the fuel rods have cooled for 5 years, the French recycle them to make new fuel. The process drastically reduces the amount of nuclear waste, but one of the byproducts of this is high-grade plutonium that can be used for nuclear weapons.
In our judgment, we have to recycle waste eventually. And recycling makes a lot of sense.
The big argument against reprocessing has been the fact that some high-grade plutonium that could be used in making a bomb could be stolen from the plant.
And we're quite concerned about that as well. And that's why the President has pursued a policy that says we shall develop advanced recycling technologies that do not result in separated plutonium.
The United States is leading an international effort to develop the process, but large-scale plutonium-free reprocessing is still decades off, and just one of a number of research projects that the industry hopes will improve upon a still young technology.
5 years ago, nuclear was dead. Now people are really buzzing about it. Flowed pebbles.
MIT professor Andrew Kadak is working on a new generation of nuclear technology called the pebble bed reactor. Instead of using conventional fuel rods, the uranium is contained in hundreds of thousands of graphite balls, which would make it safer than conventional reactors.
This type of reactor is very unique in the sense that there's no way to melt this down. Why? Because the power inside each little pebble is so low that the temperatures here don't get high enough to reach the melting temperature of uranium. These reactors are exactly what people really want to see, and that is no meltdowns.
It's difficult to fight against climate change and at the same time to be against nuclear power, because you have not a lot of ways to produce energy without CO2 emissions. You have hydro, you have nuclear, you have wind, and you have solar. But wind and solar are, temporary sources of energy. It works when you have wind, it works when you have sun. No sun, no wind, no energy.
This demonstrates a controlled nuclear reactor in a power plant. The reactor heats the heavy water. That heat is exchanged in a water boiler that produces steam that drives a turbine that spins a 60 Hz, three-phase generator.
The electricity goes through a transformer and is sent to the distribution grids.
The Coburg reactor operates on 3 separate water systems. Here, the water is the coolant, but in other types of nuclear reactors, gas is used as the coolant. The fact that the 3 systems are separate is important because it means that the water in the reactor, which is radioactive but is in a closed system, does not come into contact with the other 2 systems, and therefore does not contaminate the water in these systems.
This is a diagram of a nuclear power plant.
Solar thermal energy conversion.
This is a 10 megawatt solar power tower, called Solar 2 in the Mojave Desert of California. 10 megawatts is enough to supply 2,500 houses, at 4 kilowatts per house.
This is a view from directly above of the 10 megawatt solar power tower.
This is another view of the 10 megawatt solar power tower.
We will now have a short video clip about solar thermal energy in Israel.
The new Solar Energy Development Center in Israel's Negev Rotem Industrial Park is more than just a bright idea, it's the promise of a bright future. Bright Source Energy and subsidiary Luz 2 have created the world's first operational solar thermal field, which will serve as a testing site for 5 larger solar fields the company plans to build in California's Mojave Desert over the next decade.
This facility is basically being used to validate the performance of the technology and the cost of the technology for the purposes of being able to finance the first real commercial plant in the States.
The pilot center aims to prove that clean energy can be generated reliably, more efficiently, and at a lower cost than ever before.
What's the most unique about what Bright Source does is we use higher temperature and higher pressure to really push efficiency high, which drives costs down. So with the ability to drive costs down, you can compete head-to-head with fossil fuels.
The competition is already heating up. This past April, Bright Source secured one of the biggest contracts in solar power history with Pacific Gas and Electric.
The plants they plan to build will add 900 megawatts of capacity to our system and deliver enough energy to serve more than 300,000 homes.
Bright Source's exclusive technology is more efficient than any other technology in 3 specific ways, according to the company. The heliostats are cheaper to build and maintain. There's no need for oil since the water is directly heated. They achieve a higher concentration of sunlight, creating higher temperatures of up to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The 1,600 computerized mirrors, or heliostats, concentrate the sun's rays and natural energy onto the boiler, which sits at the top of the 60-meter tower. This heats the water to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. From the receiver, the superheated pressurized steam.
Heat engines convert heat energy to mechanical energy or electrical energy.
Steam engines, including the reciprocating and turbine types. Internal combustion engines of all types including gasoline, diesel, gas turbine, and jet engines, and even nuclear power plants are all examples of heat engines.
In the early days of the development of steam engine, where fire was the source of the heat, these were often called fire engines.
Indeed, even hydroelectric plants can be considered a type of heat engine. The heat energy of the sun is used to evaporate the water that later falls as rain to fill the lakes and rivers behind the dams that serve to supply the water to the hydroelectric power plants.
Heat is a manifestation of the kinetic energy of molecules. As the temperature increases, the kinetic energy of the molecules increases. For a fixed volume, this will result in an increased pressure.
The increased pressure due to the heat input can be used to perform work, thus converting heat energy to mechanical energy or work.
Combined cycle and cogeneration high-efficiency steam engines.
This is a chart of the electricity generation efficiencies.
It is important to keep in mind that although solar photovoltaic, solar thermal, and wind turbines have low efficiencies, the energy source is free.
This is another chart of the electricity generation efficiencies. Again note that although geothermal power has a low efficiency, the energy source is free.
This is a diagram of a typical steam cycle coal power plant. Efficiencies are generally in the 30 to 40% range.
Should we build more, but better, fossil fuel power plants?
This is a diagram of a combined cycle power plant. Efficiencies can reach up in the 60% range.
This shows the improvement in power plant efficiency over time.
Thomas Newcomen's engine operated at atmospheric pressure for pumping water out of mines, and was only 0.5% efficient. James Watt's engine operated at a much higher temperature, pressure, and speed, and got up to 4% efficiency.
With steam turbines operating at much higher temperatures, pressures, and speeds, the efficiencies rose from 3% to 42%.
With the newer combined cycle steam turbines using natural gas, efficiencies are projected to get above 60%, and possibly even as high as 65%.
Cogeneration in any type of power plant. There is a lot of waste heat that is the exhaust steam or hot gases of combustion after they have done their work in pushing a piston or turning a turbine. These exhaust gases are still well above room temperature, but are at too low a temperature and pressure to do any more mechanical work.
These exhaust gases or steam can be utilized to preheat the water for steam generation, and in many cases are just vented to the atmosphere. A combined generation, or combined heat and power (CHP), power plant is one that uses exhaust gases that can no longer be utilized to perform mechanical work for such applications as space heating buildings and residences, and for producing hot water for general use.
This compares a conventional power plant with a combined generation, or combined heat and power (CHP), power plant. This is called cogeneration, The overall efficiency of a cogeneration power plant, in terms of both mechanical and thermal power produced, can be increased beyond that of conventional plants.
Thus, a cogeneration combined cycle power plant can have overall efficiencies well above 60%, and possibly up into the 80 or 90% range. However, these plants must be situated in areas where the waste heat can effectively be utilized, such as in large cities in colder climates.
Cogeneration combined cycle power plants are so efficient. Why aren't more being built?
This is a chart of the worldwide electric power generation as of 2016. Coal leads at 38%. Then natural gas at 23%, hydroelectric at 16%, nuclear at 10%, and oil at 4%.
Renewable energy, principally wind and solar but excluding hydroelectric, is only 8%.
This is the worldwide electric generation by type.
This is the U.S. electricity generation by type, as of 2014. We have coal leading at 39%, followed by natural gas at 27%, and then nuclear at 20%. Renewables, including hydroelectric, account for 13%.
This is a graph of the U.S. electricity generation by type from 1950 to 2020. We see that coal has decreased substantially from its peak in 2008.
This shows the history and future projections for electricity generation by fuel type in the U.S. from 1990 out to 2040, in trillions of kilowatts-hours.
On average, a typical coal-burning power plant in 2013 was about 33% efficient in converting heat energy into electrical power. A gas-fired plant was about 42% efficient. A natural gas combined cycle power plant, in which waste heat from a natural gas turbine is used to power a steam turbine. The generation efficiency may be as much as high as 60%.
Looking at overall efficiencies, we note that the energy generation efficiency from power source to plug is only about 30%.
Recommended video, YouTube navigation.
Thanks for watching. Please watch some more of my great videos.